Okay, in lesson 6 of the textbook, we're starting to get into color, and this activity that we're asked to do, I think, is pretty neat because it's giving us some cues about what you can do with Illustrator that we'll be learning in this chapter and chapters coming up. But what I also like is that it sort of gives you a way to start thinking about something that I'm going to have you do for your midterm, which is a brand identity. And you can see, for example, that we have a very consistent look and feel of a brand. However, the palette is changing across the artboards. But that's just think about that a little bit right now. We want to really focus on color. The first thing that they ask you to do in the activities for lesson 6, is to select an object. And this is going to start getting us oriented to the color interface for Adobe Illustrator. And what that object is the green shape behind the pizza sauce. So let's see if I can get it into isolation mode. And there we have this object. I'm going to move it over here to get a little bit of a better perspective on it. This object that we're looking at, as I zoom in, you will be able to see, maybe not very well depending on the quality of your monitor, but this graphic shape has both a fill and what's known as a stroke. And the fill is the contents of the object. The fill color, what color or pattern or what have you, or gradient is filling the object, and then the idea of the stroke, which is how our attributes assign to the boundary of the object, or the outline, essentially. In this case, our stroke of our object over here in the Tools menu, you can see what those attributes are. We have this yellow stroke, and then here I can click on the back to get the fill, and that's the green fill that colors the object. So we see over here in the toolbar the color reference panel, which tells you the fill of the object, and if I click on it, the stroke of the object. This convention of these two square shapes in the toolbar is used across Illustrator, InDesign, and Photoshop, although in Photoshop it's a little different, but it's this idea of color swatches and giving you information on a color swatch, and in the instance of InDesign and Illustrator, as well as the stroke that outlines that object. And what's nice is when you can tell which object attribute is going to be changed by looking at the positions of these two boxes. So right now this is telling me is that if I go up to the swatches panel or to the control panel and I assign a color value, it is going to affect the stroke because the green fill is in the background. But hey, look at this. If I click on the fill, notice the stacking order of these two objects has changed. So that means that if I change any color value, for example, over in this area right here, you'll see that it's going to affect the fill of the object. Let me go and click on the stroke, and you can watch as I change the stroke color of the object. Okay, so that's the thing you should know about this little interface. Here you can toggle and switch the two attributes so that they go back and forth by hitting on this little back and forth arrow here, and you can default to the default fill and stroke by clicking on this icon here, and that takes me to a white fill and a black outline. Now, as you can see, I have my color panel open. I'm going to just depress that back down, but I want to orient you to the other places that you can look to manipulate color. I'm going to revert back a few steps. I'm hitting Command Z a number of times to just kind of bring this object back to where we need it to be. I will move to my hand tool so we can look at that. Up here, you have the color palette. And what this is giving you is a preview of the color space. RGB is our current color space right now, as well as the values associated for that color space. And these little indicators can be moved to the left and to the right to adjust colors. I'm going to undo that. And I can, of course, move the panel closed by clicking on the arrow. I can also click on the color guide option. We're going to be learning about color guides, which are handy little pre-assembled color sets that work well together based upon various color theory premises. So we'll decompress that. Down here, you can see your swatches. Now, by default, Illustrator loads this kind of swatch palette, which is basically very common swatches. A lot of times what I do when I'm working is I take one of these swatches and maybe manipulate it. But in this chapter, we'll learn a great deal more about how to use those swatches. Then we go back to the control panel. Looking up here at the top of the screen, we see that we have an easy interface to manipulate our object fill and stroke. We have the fill color indicated to the left here and the stroke color here. If you click on these arrows, you see that the palettes are brought up, and you can select these colors from the palette to just instantly change your stroke and what have you. So I hope this gives you a friendly introduction and orientation to where you will be working with color in your documents, and the tools that you have available to you. This chapter will probably teach us much, much more about this than I've given you here, but this is just a rough cut, get you in the water on working with colors in Lesson 6.